Hey guys, this is Patrick from STH, and this is affectionately called the STH Blue Door Studio. It's in my house and it is completely crazy. This little studio is how we did absolutely everything during the global pandemic. This shot most of our product photography for the STH main site. We also did the main talking head camera there. We did our B-roll here. We did basically everything that we produced for about the last year and a half in this studio. And well, it changed a lot over the years and became something that is absolutely awesome and something that I wanted to share because frankly, I really haven't seen anything of this scale that somebody has built on YouTube. And, I watched Gerald Undone and some of the other famous, YouTubers that do these kind of studio tours. And I think this actually is something that, well, it's kind of like Frankenstein, but it's also something that's super useful. And I want to share how I really use the studio. And for those of you who are not YouTubers, I also use this exact setup to go do Zoom calls with CEOs and executives of major tech companies all the time because it gave me a very consistent sounding and looking studio. So while this is far from perfect, it's also completely revolutionary to how I've worked over the last years and how the STH team has worked over the last year. So I wanted to show it because it is being torn down just after I finish this. Literally, I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to take out the memory card, and then this studio is going to be torn down and moved to our new location. Now, there are a couple fun little things that are here. For example, Alexa, studio lights off. Alexa, studio lights on. Now, by now, I know a lot of folks are probably wondering, how does a somewhat normal guy start with a normal small living room and turn it into something like this? Well, for that, we have to go back in time. So let's take a little bit of look at the evolution of the studio. And really the genesis of this started in 2019 when I went on a little walk around Taipei, Taiwan with Linus of Linus Tech Tips fame. And we were just kind of walking and talking about an idea for a video that eventually became the jellyfish fryer video. I said, hey, I'll go fly up to Vancouver, may check out Whistler while I'm there. And then, he was like, hey, what do you want? And I said, absolutely nothing. I just want to go and see how you guys produce your content and what you do. And over the course of filming for a day, I basically went from knowing absolutely nothing to basically asking a whole bunch of questions saying like, hey, why do you do this? Or what do you do here? What are you using for this? And I learned a lot more than just the what, but also the why things were being done. And I have absolutely no background in this, so I learned an absolute ton from the LTT folks. And that really took me from having no idea of what the heck I was going to do to having at least a vision or an idea. So my first vision actually was in this exact same space when this still had a couch and it was actually a living room. I had my buddy Joe come down and we started doing a couple, filming a little bit of a product video or two, I think when he came down for a day. And it came out, I guess, okay-ish. I didn't really have great equipment. I had nothing, especially to this scale. And my buddy Joe had worked at DirecTV, Google, other places where he'd done this stuff professionally. And he basically looked at my setup and he was like, yeah, you could totally do a little bit better than this, huh? And so after that discussion with Joe, and by the way, this is the same Joe that just did our data center, Phoenix Snap data center tour video. So if you want to kind of see Joe and what we did, you can definitely go check that out. But at the end of the day, I basically looked at Joe and I said, okay, Joe, so like basically what you're saying is I need to go get a dedicated studio space. And he said, yeah, pretty much. And so after that LTT filming and having Joe, I basically said, okay, we need to have a studio. And so from the summer of 2019 all the way through the start of the pandemic, we had a studio in Sunnyvale that we were doing all the product photography from. And that frankly was just set up absolutely awesome. I mean, we had it was basically the LTT studio scaled way, way down. And it kind of worked actually really well. I love that little studio. And fast forward into like February-ish of 2020. And basically what happened was the first COVID case, I guess, that we had in the area happened in a hospital that was just down the street from my home. And so I'm in Mountain View and Sunnyvale is where the studio was. And so basically what happened was we very quickly went from, oh, there's this thing that isn't really here to, okay, we're now locking down. And California, and specifically the Bay Area, Santa Clara County, locked down very early, I guess, in the overall US response. And why that particularly mattered was that the old STH studio was actually in a shared building that we had with other folks. And because it was in that shared building and basically everything closed down with the pandemic, we lost access to that studio for absolutely months. And the warning that we had was actually only, a couple hours. I mean, it was something like, over the weekend, they said, okay, on Monday or Tuesday, whatever it was, a couple days, like a couple hours even, they basically said, yeah, you're going to be locked down. And so I was looking at this from running STH and thinking, okay, well, we still need to do product photography. We probably should be doing video as well. I mean, what can we do if we don't have our studio? That's going to be a big deal. We can still get stuff in the data center because that's considered critical infrastructure. But I mean, what are we going to do in terms of all the photography that we do? So I literally went that evening that they told us that we were going to be under lockdown, and I went to the studio. I grabbed every light and camera and stand, everything that I absolutely could, put it in the Tesla, drove it back home and said, okay, well, now I got to go figure this out, assuming that we can't get into any buildings that would be commercial real estate. And when figuring out the somewhere, it basically became my living room because this was the only space that I was pretty reasonably sure, at least, that I'd be able to access during the whole pandemic. And that was actually a very correct assumption, by the way. And for those of you who don't know Mountain View, California is where Google is based, which means that real estate, even though it's a suburb, is not necessarily inexpensive. I live pretty much in maybe not the nicest area in Mountain View, but still homes in this area sell for about $1,200 per square foot. Or if you're on the metric system, you can think of that more as something like, I think, just under $13,000 or so per meter or square meter. And what that practically means is that, having like a 2,000 square foot house in Mountain View is actually a fairly good size home. Whereas in other parts of the country, it would be a lot smaller of a home. This is here a fairly big home, but it still also means that you only have so much space to do things like have a studio at home. And basically the idea was that, well, if we weren't going to be able to have gatherings with this whole pandemic and all of these lockdowns, then maybe the living room would just not get used at all. And if it wasn't going to get used, this basically became the place that I could put a studio. So the original idea was to put everything on tripods and C-stands and have all the cameras and lights and all that kind of stuff set up, and then be able to go and move stuff around depending on what we were shooting. And that kind of worked okay, I guess. I mean, really the only challenges with that setup was that it looked horrible, it sounded horrible, and it was just a total pain to work with. I mean, on the pain side, there are cables all over the place because you need, XLR cables for the mics, you need power cables for all the gear and all that kind of, and all the stands and stuff like that. And they were basically sitting, because the only way I could really situate it, they were basically sitting on my primary migratory path from my bedroom to the coffee maker in the morning. And when you're groggy, it's dark out, it's kind of hard to go see stuff and you trip over things that you don't want to be tripping over. Also, this room has windows that are kind of up higher, and especially during the summer months, what happens is that you get light come in those windows and it'll either bounce directly onto this area of the living room, or it will bounce onto the house next door, which is orange, and then make a orange glow to whatever you have here. The ceiling here is actually super high because it goes up 2 floors, but on the floor we also have things like wood, so there's basically no sound dampening in this area. And what that practically means is that it had a wicked echo. And also because Mountain View real estate is expensive, it means that the street is actually not too far behind the camera over there, which meant that we would pick up all kinds of stuff from, cars driving by that were, had fancy exhausts or whatever, or just people yelling loudly, like neighborhood kids yelling loudly walking down the street. And so what that practically means, if you have to deal with this light and you also have to deal with all this noise, is that recording time basically became only after maybe 10:30, 11 p.m. every night. And so that's why I look tired in every single one of those videos. I look a little tired today, but that's because I spent the weekend closing bars in Nashville, Tennessee. So I realized that the audio was just so bad. And just, this is actually straight out of the camera audio that you're hearing right now. But the audio back then was so bad that it had this just crazy echo. And I mean, I tried lav mics, I tried condenser mics, I tried shotgun mics. Nothing would just get rid of it because it was just a crazy amount of echo. And so what I started doing was I said, well, okay, some of the ground rules here, I do not want to go put all kinds of holes and stuff in the walls. And because of that, I basically said, okay, let me go see if I can set up blankets. And maybe if I have blankets, those can block some of the light and they can block some of the sound, and maybe that would work. So I went out and actually got a whole bunch of these very thick acoustic blankets. And I tried hanging them on everything that I had, but that really was janky and that just frankly didn't work at all. And so I started saying, okay, well, what if I got some more tripods or C-stands and started hanging the acoustic blankets on those? And they're kind of heavy blankets, so that worked, but it was really not a good solution. There were big gaps in the blankets, so light would come through anyway. And so at that point, I said, okay, I need to get a bigger and more robust solution. And so that's when I really found the F34 trussing. The original idea with the F34 trussing was that I would have little pedestals and I would be able to go put wheels on this. So this whole thing is actually on wheels and you can move the entire setup. And I would thought, well, if I just had little totems that were just kind of little poles that had wheels on them, it would still be very convenient to wheel around. And then I could put the tripods where I needed them and everything would work okay. And that would give me enough strength to hold the blankets. And since I hadn't seen a video like this to give me inspiration, I kind of thought about like, all the stages and stuff and all those places that they actually use F34 trussing, like concerts and stuff like that, and how they tend to have 4 poles and they have that whole structure around the top. And I said, well, maybe I don't need all that. But then eventually I just ended up at that design anyway. So if you're going to do something like this, I would say don't try doing it the easy way. Just go and do the full, cube type thing that I have here. It's much better. It's extremely sturdy. And these F34 beams, I think they each hold something like a couple thousand pounds each. So, having some lights and some blankets and stuff on them, absolutely no problem. This thing does not move if you have the wheels locked and it's sitting in place. Also, just a quick note here, absolutely everything here also has not just big clamps, but it also has the safety cables because I do not want things falling on me. Even the blankets that are up here also have safety cables, even though they're just blankets and they probably wouldn't hurt me if they fell on me. And so I got some more blankets, and basically what I ended up doing was fully encasing the structure in these blankets, and that basically meant that I had no light. These blankets have white sides and they have black sides basically, and if you put the black side in, you don't get any weird reflections or anything like that on all these metal products that we review. And so that actually worked really, really well for all the photography, and so this is just a great space for light. And then for the audio side, we didn't get the echo because the acoustic blankets managed to keep that in check. And we also don't get road noise if people are driving by because we have shotgun mics, which are right here. And also we have the acoustic blanket. So overall, this basically fixed all of the problems that I had. And since I needed a backdrop and we were in the middle of the pandemic, basically what I had this little blue door backdrop, and that kind of became the STH standard for the studio. I think it's going to be retired as we move into the new place, but that's just kind of how this thing came about. Now, of course, I would like to say that this was all, a vision that went directly into production, but realistically, there were a lot of iterations. And I just got to say that we started with a much lower cost setup, and this definitely scaled up over time because it became super useful and the value of the setup really warranted that kind of investment. And so let's just kind of go through some of the big features, and I'm going to point here and hopefully we're going to have some B-roll that I'm going to be able to shoot. Remember, we're going to be taking this down directly after, so you're not going to see things like the acoustic blankets that are normally on the floor because those have already been packed. And so there's a little bit of that. Sorry, I kind of made this decision to do this video a little bit late, but we're going to go through it the best I can. So in front of me, there are actually 2 different lights with 2 different grid diffusers and dome diffusers on them. And those are the Aperture 300Xs. When I originally started the studio, I think I had those 60 watt Godox or newer units. And frankly, those just didn't have enough light for when we started doing product photography and some of the photography that we did. So they had to get swapped out for higher power units. Other lighting that's interesting above me is the Aperture 120D2. And the reason that that's there is just to provide kind of that overhead light. Sometimes, we'll shut off some of these lights and we'll only have certain ones going. And so that's kind of my, above me light. Now on this, you're going to see that we have the Light Dome or Light Dome Mini. I don't remember which one, but that's on this right now. But that's just because I kind of wanted to get a little bit more light in the studio than we had originally when I started doing this. And so we actually have a couple different types of diffusion that we use on the light above. I will say that this is one that in the new studio, I think we're going to change to be more kind of like RGB panels, just because of kind of how I want it to look in the future. But this has actually worked pretty well. The one thing that did not work, and I'll just tell you this real quick, is that if you do get a parabolic diffuser and you put it over your head, because we move the table back to this position to be able to do our photography, the challenge with this all being fixed and having that parabolic diffuser overhead is that if you speak and you have a parabolic diffuser overhead, it actually makes this kind of crazy sound that gets picked up by a shotgun mic. And so, don't use a parabolic one, definitely. There is an overhead camera. It's a Panasonic GH5 that's sitting up there, and that thing works okay. We just don't tend to use the overhead camera really enough. We should be using it more, frankly. And so that's something I'm going to look at how do we make it better for the next generation? Now, one thing that we definitely innovated on and was one of the best things that I've ever done, which was we actually originally had this all set up with all the lights on the structure, but we did not have the camera on there. It was just basically a tripod because frankly, I didn't even know what the things were called to be able to mount a camera to a truss structure like this. But I was browsing eBay during the pandemic and I found a Pro-Aim pan tilt head, and that's basically what we're using here. And one of the cool things about that is the fact that it is meant to be able to be on a jib or something that you can actually control it remotely. So I have a little joystick that I can use, and I can sit here and I can adjust where I am in the frame if I want to, if the camera gets nudged or knocked or anything like that, without having to go around, because it's a real pain if you're trying to film yourself to be able to move things if it's that far away, because that's like, I don't know, maybe 2 meters or maybe 1.5 meters away from me right now. I also have a secondary camera that I use for Zoom calls. Especially before we were using the cinema cameras, I was really worried about overheating. And so, or just, longevity cameras. I don't know why, I just was. And so I have a little Z cam that I use for that. And originally that setup was actually using something that was kind of like a teleprompter like setup. And I had a screen that would go and project people's faces. So I could be like looking at someone while I was speaking directly to them in the camera that was behind the glass. And that worked okay. But then I tried doing it a couple times and using that setup where I would read my script. And what I basically found is that if I read the script, number one, you guys tell me that I'm reading the script because it's really obvious. And also, I just absolutely suck at reading scripts, so that just didn't work. But the reason that this whole setup was great was that by removing the tripod from the equation, it basically meant that I had a very easy path to walk around the space and not trip on anything. I can go and use the truss structure to go and route cables and stuff, so I don't trip on cables or I don't trip on a tripod or anything like that, especially since this camera gear is pretty expensive. You don't really want to be doing that, and so it worked really well. I did try a video or two putting a camera with a kind of more wide angle lens closer like on the table, but basically I gesticulate with my hands too much and then I rock the table and then it looks all terrible, so that doesn't work very well. For the Zoom calls, I actually have a Project Tiny Mini Micro, so a 1 liter PC that is in the Lenovo ThinkCentre Tiny-in-One touchscreen over there, and that touchscreen basically lets me go and set up my calls and have all that kind of stuff without having to have things directly in front of me. The idea was that was going to run more of the automation, but we're talking about automation in a second. Later in the process, I had an extra TV, so I finally found a way to mount that. And so I have a television that's mounted up there in the event that I ever need to go and have like a very technical diagram or something that if I'm speaking without my script and I need to go reference, I have an easy way to go do that. Also for Zoom calls, it sometimes helps to be able to go and see things, but I tend not to use that because the screen is up there. So if I look at it, it looks like I'm rolling my eyes at the person on Zoom. So that's why I basically don't use that much. Again, that's an area for improvement. And between the acoustic blankets off to that side over there, just behind and outside of the structure, I actually have a little case. That case has some lights and I keep all of my lenses and filters and all that kind of stuff in there. It's just an easy way to go have it organized. Also, have things like prevent dust from getting on it and, making sure the humidity is maintained. And so it's just a nice little case. And I added that a couple months ago because that really kind of helped organize. So I kind of like that case a lot. Behind me, you're going to see the little background and you can see that it is just a little sheet of a background. It's not a green screen or anything like that. The original idea was it was going to be a green screen, but then people kind of like this and my favorite color is blue. So that's why we're actually using that. It's lit by 2 RGB panels that basically just give a little light to the background. So that way the light kind of fills in behind me a little bit more than it does otherwise. Otherwise, there's like these just giant shadows and you kind of lose it, especially like over here. You're also going to see that we have the nanlite Pavo tubes that are in the structure. And those are just because I sometimes get in these like kicks where I really want to have RGB lights in our product photography. And so that just kind of helps. And then we have, little ones that we can move around the table as well. So let's just talk impact of having something like this, because, just to kind of give you an idea, and I don't know the square meters, but square feet wise, this is somewhere in the, 95 to 100 square feet range, just this truss structure. And that's a pretty significant investment in terms of space. And it also costs some money to go and buy all this stuff. So the kind of question, I guess, is like, why? Well, one of the big reasons for it is just the consistency. So something that nobody has actually noticed in any of our YouTube videos that this has happened, but some of our YouTube videos actually have segments that are like filmed 2 months before the actual video and the main part of the video are filmed or something like that. And you just can't tell because this is so consistent that I can literally just put the same STH merch shop that you can find in the description, but I can go use my same sweatshirt or t-shirt, and you probably will have no idea about the fact that I'm actually, recording something months after the first time a part was recorded. So that really helps just in terms of being able to have a consistent look. It may not be the best look, but I'm here, so that's only going to get so good anyway. I'm not George Clooney. But the other side to it is that I can transition between doing YouTube videos and Zoom calls within like 30 seconds. I can go transition the whole thing to go do product photography in less than 2 minutes. And so that whole ability to just rapidly change means that, if you have a day where you have maybe 45 minutes or an hour to go knock out maybe some photos or a YouTube video or something like that, and then you have Zoom calls and you have to switch back and forth, having something that is very easy to transition between the different activities that you're doing is actually kind of awesome, because it just means that you can get more done and you're more efficient in your day. And our products that we take photos of and, we have to deal with, right? We have little tiny drives that are, very small, but then we also have these giant servers that can weigh like 450 pounds and have 100 hard drives and all kinds of other stuff in them. And so being able to have a studio that can hit that kind of level of scale, I think was important as well. And the studio really lets us do that. If we had a smaller studio, it would be a little bit hard to be able to get the larger servers and still shoot them at something like 50 millimeter on a full frame, where you actually get a nice smooth line rather than having a little bit curved line from a macro lens or a wide angle lens or something like that. I absolutely try my best to always make sure that we don't have people's servers being shown on STH where the lines are straight in real life and not straight when we take photos or video, because I just don't really like that look. And just for someone like me, having the ability to have something that, in maybe 8 hours of sitting on calls and filming, taking photos, all that kind of stuff, I'm spending maybe 10 minutes doing all the reconfigurations that I need over that 8 hours. It actually saves just an absolute ton of time. And for me, I'm just time starved. So getting that time back is the most important thing that I can do. Now, I know some folks are going to say, hey, this is like a YouTube studio, but realistically, this is a phenomenal Zoom setup as well. And, of course, you can do different things with this, but this whole concept is something that I think a lot of executives, I've been on so many calls over the last year where a, tech executive that the company is paying a lot of money sounds absolutely horrible because there's giant echoes in the room or you can't see them or something like that. So having, 100 square feet in a home or a, out office or something like that, where people can come in and actually have a very consistent Zoom experience may seem like overkill if you think like, oh, that costs many thousands of dollars to get that. But on the flip side to it, when you look at the level of decisions and the cost of the folks that are on those calls and stuff like that, actually the setting up something like this is actually not a huge cost when you're talking about executive communications. Now, again, the reason that we're doing this overview of the studio today is that it is being decommissioned. Literally, I'm going to start taking this down because the moving folks are coming tomorrow to go pack it up and put it in their truck and then take it to the new location. And then we're going to be setting it up probably over the next couple weeks. And so hopefully we'll have a new look in a couple weeks. And hopefully it'll be better, because that's what I kind of try with every generation, to get a little bit better than we had before. So as a quick update for STH, since it seems like vaccinations are really starting to happen a little bit more. I got vaccinated back in like April and May. I just think that we do need to have a space that's much bigger than this again, like we used to, that we can have multiple people work. And so we are going to be hiring some folks to really take a lot of that load that I've been shouldering during the pandemic of, taking some of the video and, doing that kind of work. And we're going to be hiring folks to be able to kind of help with that at STH. So that's another big part of the move, is just getting more help, because just frankly, we need it. So anyway, that's the tour of my crazy Zoom and YouTube little studio that I have and I set up during the pandemic. I definitely don't think it's perfect. I know a lot of people do not like this background, and that is totally legitimate. You just have to realize this is like literally the best thing I could fit in about 3 inches of depth during the pandemic. And this is what I had on hand, because it was a total scramble just to be able to even get this set up. And I don't necessarily think everybody on YouTube should go do something like this. That would be absolutely silly. And there are much better, much easier setups by far far. At the same time, if you did want to see something and get some inspiration for doing something a little bit bigger, well, hopefully this helps. And I really actually frankly hope that you have something that is way bigger, way better, and way better done than I've done, because I was really just kind of making a lot of this stuff up as I went along. I know for me, if I had seen something like this early on in the process, it probably would have saved me a lot of time and a lot of money experimenting on my own, because nobody really kind of walked me through why I wanted to go do what I ended up doing here, but this ended up being an absolutely great solution, so I wanted to share that with you now. And hey, if you did like this video and you want to see our new space when it's online, hopefully in August, if all goes right, well then why don't you give us a like, click subscribe, turn on those notifications so you can see whenever we come out with great new videos. As always, thanks for watching and have an awesome day.